Pleasure to have all of you with us today. To those of you who are joining us in the audience and live on the web, thank you very much, and thank you also for your patience with the delayed start. In case anybody was in any doubt as to the importance of digitized networks, we couldn't start without the internet. And so it's up and running and we're ready to go. Today is Women's Day, so I would like to say a special welcome to our ladies in the audience and to the ladies following us on the web. We're in Brazil, and so I should say Happy Dia de Mulheres. Is that correct?
Did he get it right?
Dia das Mulheres. Sorry, my Portuguese pronunciation is not very good. So today's Enel Focus On is the 7th in this edition of meetings that we hold around the world, talking about subjects which are of general interest on the global stage, in the global agenda at the moment. And today we're here to talk about smart grids and about digitization. And it is not a coincidence that we have chosen Goiás and Goiânia specifically as the location for this event. Last night we held a big event for our 1,500 employees here at the head office in Goiânia of the distribution business, which as of yesterday became Enel Distribuição Goiás. The distribution business that the Enel Group acquired last year and was rebranded to the Enel brand yesterday. And so it is, of course, a pleasure that we're here today, and we have two very special guests with us. The first is the head of our infrastructure and networks business globally, Engineer Livio Gallo, who I'm going to ask to make a brief introductory speech and presentation to set out what it is that the Enel Group is doing in the world of grid digitization specifically. And Livio will be able to explain to you why this is so crucial for the world and the way in which we are going to live in the future. And in fact, he is going to also demonstrate to you, together with our second special guest, who I will introduce later, that a lot of this stuff is already a reality today. And this is really exciting, and it's a really interesting topic. And so it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this Enel Focus On, and that I ask Livio Gallo to please make a brief presentation. Livio, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Obrigado. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Bom dia a todos. Bom dia a todos. Bom dia, Estado do Goiás. Before we start with the core presentation about the discussion about smart grid, let me just give a brief overview about our group, who we are. First chart, please. Enel is an integrated utility player in the energy market, active in all the energy sectors, in generation, renewable, transmission, distribution, sales, and value-added solutions. We are active in 30 countries with 63,000 people. Next chart. With 87,000 megawatt of generation capacity, including 1/3 of renewables. Can you switch to the next chart? Okay. We run our networks with 65 million customers connected to our networks. Our networks has a length of 2,100 kilometers, is 6 times the distance between the Earth and the Moon. So we run in every country very important networks, and our operational margin is more or less 15 billion euros. We used to work in the past 8-10 years ago in a system which we called traditional energy system, where we had single point of generation plants, oil-fired, coal-fired, gas-fired, nuclear, and so on, injecting energy into the high voltage network, distributed and transporting the energy to the regions, to the cities, transmitting the energy from the high voltage to the middle voltage to the low voltage and delivering the services to the houses. So we had a very linear system. Now, we went through in the last 10 years, we went through a dramatic change. We still have some generation plant, major generation plant, but now we have 100,000 of single point of generation, including renewables, solar, geothermal, photovoltaic. So we are managing what we call an intermittent flow, which is not anymore a one flow into the network, but it's a two-way flow where the renewables injecting energy into the network, they are not controllable. They are just dispatched by God. So we cannot control them. There is also an important evolution with additional and important stakeholders, customers. Electric mobility, electric cars. An electric car is a customer, no? Because we deliver energy to the cars. It's also a generator because it can deliver energy into the networks. There are different entities like aggregator that can sum up 1,000 customers, 10,000 customers in a city and sell an energy reduction in consumption. So it's a completely different world where we have to manage a balance, an energy flow which could not be controllable, could only be forecasted and managed afterwards. We are more or less experiencing the dramatic change of the ICT, which moved from the 80s, from the late 80s, from a centralized operation down to PCs, today to mobile. But today, the change is faster than before. The world is changing faster. The pace of change is more and more important. So we are living now in a world, in the energy market, where we think the distribution system, the distribution operator, has a pivotal role, managing prosumer, producer and consumers, having in the mega cities storage into their houses, injecting energy into the network and receiving energy from the photovoltaic on the roof, depending upon the level of consumption and injection, and consumption and generation. Demand side management, load flow management, off-grid. There are also islanded systems, which are not connected, not always, some way connected to the network, which anyhow have to be managed, because at the end of the time, at the end of the day, the electric system has to work with a unique frequency. So this is the world where we are living now, and our strategic answer is in the next chart, if I can move it, no? Okay. Our strategic answer is digitalization. What does it mean? It does mean that for solving this big issue of the energy flow into our system, or the changing environment connected to our network, we have to digitize every component of our network. By the way, we have installed, we have up and running in the world 41 million smart meters connected to our customers. We started up in the year 2000. This dramatic change started more or less in 2007, 2008. We anticipated the change. We installed in 2001 the first 30 million of smart meters in the world. Now we have 41 million. In 4 years' time, we will have 65. And the smart meter is the base of a digital architecture of our networks. We run the networks in all the mega cities here in Latin America, like Buenos Aires, like Santiago, like Lima, Estado do Rio, like Buenos Aires, like Bogota. And as you know, as I think you know, in 15 years time, 65% of the population will live in mega cities. And the consumption of electricity will be 70–75% in the mega cities. This is our vision now. Our network has to evolve, running in mega cities, but of course also the rural area. Smart meters, including electricity, gas, water, heat, collecting all this digitally using the infrastructure, electric mobility with fast charge, distributed storage, vehicle to grid. Vehicle to grid is a special connection with the car when if you need more power, you can sum up 1,000 cars injecting power into the network and delivering ancillary services to the network for balancing the network. So you can also gain money if you have an electric car, using it as a distributed storage. Secondary substation of our network as data hub. We can use edge computing, edge intelligence for elaborating all the signals related to the substation, collecting sensor using LoRa and data protocols, not only sensor related to the networks, but also about the environment, the population running in the networks, amount of cars, humidity, wind, and so on, and deliver them to the municipality in order to build up a development model of a city connected to the development model of the energy consumption, which is very important to have a development, a sustainable development of a technology, of a solution of the networks and of the customers. Renewable integration, forecast of the renewables, local forecast, storage of injecting energy of the renewables, balancing of the energy locally, managing a double flow, a two-way flows, dispatching the energy, which up to now we didn't do that. The TSO, the transmission system operator, up to now is managing the flow of energy. But with this situation, the high voltage network doesn't know what happened downwards because the energy is injecting from the bottom. I think you understand it. Active demand and flexibility. There is a very, very important trend of a customer to actively participate to the market. An active participation of the market could be enabled if you have a double way of connection with the customer, deliver information and receiving information. Load balancing, having a distributed intelligence, you can balance the energy within the house, within the skyscraper, within the district, at the end of the day, within the cities, within the region. If you are able to capture locally the energy injection and the flow of energy, you can balance it, and you can distribute it in the most efficient way. And at the end of the day, big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, because we are generating with our networks and with our sensors and meters and distributed intelligence exabytes of data every year. This year we are generating today, I'm sure, 1 terabyte of data. So we have to manage them, to work on service on demand. We have every system on cloud, working on services. And the real objective is to be able to extract value from all the data which we have. Finally, broadband, we can use the network for laying down the fiber optic, connecting every building. We are doing it in some countries, which seems an obvious thing, but up to now it's not even been done. And everything in cloud with distributed intelligence. This is our vision, but we are already implemented it with pilot project, rolling down the pilot project in the counties and cities where we are in. There are 145 billion euros investment in the next 4 years in smart grids, because the translation of digitalization in our world is smart grid, is the concept of a smart grid. 67% of investment are in the smart metering. This is worldwide. In our case, we are already beyond this situation because we install already, starting the year 2000, 30 million. Now we are at 31. We will install 65 million. We are not in this portion very important. We are working in advanced smart grid here in distribution automation. What did we do for achieving or for approaching this objective? We revised also of our processes, digitalizing them, and revising the processes of a distribution system using a digitalized lens with a digitalized focus. We are implementing in our processes all the technology which we think will be suitable and right for achieving this objective. So starting from self-driving drones, fully digitalized secondary substation, deep learning, connectivity, remote control and automation, machine learning, predictive maintenance, blockchain, and of course cyber security is very important. What we are really doing, if we would like to rephrase this kind of approach and objective, our asset is considered to be physical, no? Poles, wires, substation, equipment, and so on. What we are really doing is to build up a network digital twin. What does it mean? That we build up, using our data, a digital model of a networks. We run, for instance, in Lima with some technology called LIDAR, laser imaging detection and recognition, with drones and with cars, mobile cars with cameras. We build up the digital model of the city of Lima. We are doing it in every cities where we are, step by step. Having a digital model, you can check using the data and extracting value from the data. You can use the digital world VM in order to check if what we think is correct, and after we can implement it on the real world. I think it's a unique approach, but we think it's very, very interesting and effective. So from a physical asset to virtual network. We see ourselves as a digital energy ecosystem, which is physical, of course, but in the new world, in the new energy world, is extracting value from the relationship with the other ecosystem. Let's say the ecosystem of a smart city, commercial and industrial customer, home and consumer, and the value comes from the changing role of the stakeholders of the other ecosystem. Let me make an example just for make it clear. A car, we say an electric car. Electric car is a customer. We deliver energy. An electric car is a generator because inject energy into the customer, into the networks. An electric car is also an ancillary service provider, because if we can aggregate 10,000 cars, and by the way, the car is the only object which you use for 5% of your time and you pay 95% for having it stopped, no? So if you can use 10,000 cars which are not running, and you can deliver suddenly the power of a battery into a network, you can provide an ancillary service to the network, and you can earn money. So the distribution system is a digital energy ecosystem which extracts value from managing the relationship with the other ecosystem and for extracting value from the changing role which they act. Is really an enabler of a new development of a sustainable society, we think. Open to your questions. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Livio. I don't know if people have any questions now that they'd like to ask Livio, or if we should move on with the program. I think what we'll do is keep the questions, unless there are any burning questions on Livio's presentation, we'll keep the questions for the end, when we're going to have, as we normally do, an open interactive discussion between everybody. Before I introduce our special guest, I think it would be useful if we could go around, we don't have a table, but around the room, just to introduce ourselves very quickly, and just to say who you are, which country you come from, and if you have any particular special interests in this topic or any particular experience in it. Can we start with you? Do we have a mic? Hang on, we need to get the microphone.
Hi, hello.
Yeah, it's on.
Hi, my name is Rafael Farinaccio. I'm a journalist from São Paulo, Brazil, representing Tecmundo here. And thank you for being here.
Hi, I am Mauricio Jaramillo Marin, journalist from Colombia, passionate about technology and the impact in people, companies, governments, and the earth, and director of Impactotic.
Hello, I'm Rafael from Fortaleza, here in Brazil, and I work with technology in a huge group. It's called Grupo Ex-Queiroz, that have entrepreneurs from water until communication, like a journalist.
Bom dia, bem-vindos a Goiás. Eu sou goiano do painel, moro aqui em Goiânia. Estamos muito felizes de recebê-los aqui. Meu nome é Décio Coutinho. Eu sou analista, especialista em cidades criativas e redes criativas.
Hi, I'm Carlos Zúñiga. I'm from Lima, Peru. I'm a consumers advocate, and I want to see how the technology impact to the well-being of the consumer.
Hi, I'm Sonia Blanco from Spain. I'm associate professor at the Faculty of Communications, and my interests are around the communications, around all of that, but also how technology can improve our lives in our domestic technology and something like that.
Hi, I'm Luca Lagna from Italy, Rome, and I work in digital transformation, and I teach topics on this one. So I'm very interested in these topics on smart grids for the impact on everything, society and everything.
Hello, I'm Cristian Manafo. I'm coming from Romania, Bucharest, Romania. I'm a former journalist turned into a blogger for 12 years by now, and I'm very interested in innovation and everything that's related to our lives and businesses as well. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Olá, meu nome é Ademilson, sou de Minas Gerais e trabalho para um portal voltado para engenharia e tecnologia.
Bom dia, obrigado pelo convite. My name is Daniele Russolillo. I come from Italy. I work for a company called Planet Idea that is actually building a smart city close to Fortaleza in San Gonçalo do Amarante for 20,000 people for affordable housing, social housing. So it's where technology, everything we've been listening now, gets social and gets user and person centric. Every day I do this kind of activity because the company wants to smart the real estate around the world. We have many projects worldwide. So my interest today is really focused on, because I deal with this kind of activities every day, and the importance to manage to deal properly with distribution system operators is absolutely relevant. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Veronica Cacciagli. I'm an Italian journalist. You can find me as Veronica Clima on Twitter because I'm specialized on energy and climate change and also on green economy. I'm mostly working on as a consultant on web communication.
Hello, thank you for receiving us. My name is Jean-Paul Prates. I'm also from the northeast of the country in Natal, that corner of Brazil in the middle of the ocean, Atlantic Ocean. And I'm devoted now to renewables with a think tank that is formed by many companies, including Enel and others, that are producing energy. And I would like to highlight one of the things that are important for our context here is that this country, Brazil, is, in my opinion, I don't have the correct statistics or the plain statistics, but I can say that we are in the country that has the highest percentage of renewable energy in its energy matrix. And I'm talking about not only the energy itself, 45% of all the energy, including oil and gas, and used for transportation, but in electricity, we're talking about more than 85% of our electricity generated by renewable sources. That means that we are, from among the major economies of the world, we are the biggest producer of renewable energy in the world. The average is around 15% around the world for the countries. So that's a point I wanted to know. Apart from that, I'm a lawyer, economist, and an energy manager, and welcome all of you for the comments and thank you for this reception.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Mirko Pallera. I'm a journalist. I'm a consultant. And I'm the publisher of Ninja Marketing, that is a magazine about marketing and business in Italy. We have a brand new section on the magazine called the Ninja Future. And in this section, we try to explain to our audience the impact of exponential technologies. So thank you for your invitation. I'm very curious about the speech of today because I have a sociological perspective. So I'm very interested in hearing your speech.
Hi, I'm Carlo Zorzoli. I'm the country manager of Enel in Brazil. I'm very interested today because I'm sure that smart grids are part of the solution for a more sustainable world and especially for the integration of renewables much more than today within the network and providing new services to citizens and users.
Hi everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Isabella Panizza, the head of the digital communication here in Enel, and I work with Ryan and Livio and Carlo.
Hi,
sorry.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to
Please switch it
introduce
off.
Zeynep, actually. So our speaker today is Zeynep Tufekci. She is a Turkish journalist. She writes for the New York Times, and she is also an associate professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and at Harvard University. She specializes on subjects around the concept of digitization, specifically around the internet, and she is going to spend the next 30 to 40 minutes just bringing some of her perspectives on these two very interesting topics and how they can impact on the daily lives of people, and I think can really touch on a lot of the interesting or the points of interest that people around the room have already identified. So, Zeynep, thank you very much for being here with us today. It's great to have you, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. So thank you for this invitation and the kind introduction. This was a fascinating topic for me to think about, and I'm just honored to be here. So I want to start by talking a tiny little bit about how I got into the topic and the field I got into, and then go into all the complications and questions that I think are worth discussing when we get to. So I was one of those kids who was really interested in math and science. And like a lot of those kids, I thought I wanted to be a physicist because that's where the secrets of the universe were, and that was so interesting. Well, a lot of times when you're a little kid and this is a common story, you want to be a physicist, you encounter the problem of nuclear weapons. Because your field, the field you want to be in, has been used in this very powerful and destructive way. And of course, your little kid brain is like, oh, this is such a big responsibility. And how do I think about this? And as I grew up and thinking about this, because of my own family circumstances, I needed to work in college. I needed to start working as soon as I went to college. And I was 16, so the very first semester, I also needed to get a job. And I was thinking, what do I do? You know, I like math, I like science, I don't really want to deal with all these ethical dilemmas. So I thought, let me pick a topic that doesn't have ethical issues, that's very practical, and I won't have to think about all of this, I can get a job quickly. And I picked computers instead of physics to avoid ethical problems. That was not the smartest thing, because right now computer scientists are, you know, building killer robots, the social networks are destabilizing the world, and there's all these things. And physicists, their big ethical dilemma is only 3 people can get the Nobel Prize for Higgs boson, even though it's thousands of people working on it. So that's what they're grappling with, while my people are changing the world in many, many ways. So I ended up in this field of many ethical dilemmas. And I started working early as a computer science person, as a programmer. And very early on, because I was growing up in Turkey, I got fascinated by the political and the social side. And there's a story, it's just one story of many that I like to tell about, just sort of realizing how complicated things were. In my first job, when I was still I'm a teenager, I'm just working, one of my managers came to me one day and said, Zeynep, can this computer tell if we're lying? And in Turkish, there are no pronouns for he, she, or it that are gender differentiated, so I couldn't really tell if he was referring to a person or a machine. He was saying, can he, or it, or she. I was like, what are we talking about? It's like, can he, can it, can you? What are you talking about? Can the computer tell if I'm lying? I'm like, yes, of course. Because I was a teenager, I just wanted to say, yeah, sure, whatever. And I thought, this is crazy. You know, can computers tell if we're lying? Of course, at the time, no. But right now, with machine learning and facial recognition, we have these kinds of technologies. And with these early interactions, I decided, okay, we are going to, I was just so fascinated by the political and social side, I thought, I'm going to switch to the politics of this. I'm going to switch to the social side of it. And I started studying the sociology and the politics of technological change. And at first, it seemed like a weird thing. You know, you're just doing something technical. It's like here, right? We're just sort of digitizing the grid. And it's not straightforward. But you're dealing with humans, and nothing about the human society is straightforward. And we have a lot of things that go into it. So I want to sort of talk about some of the questions that came up as I was researching and thinking about these questions. And I think in the previous presentation, Livio's presentation, there was all these clear benefits. You know, you can have increased renewables, you can distribute your energy load better, you can do a lot of things that in the long run will clearly be of benefit with a smarter grid compared to just the old way you had it. So this is like an industrial revolution all over again. And the way I think about it is that the first industrial revolution brought us many, many great things, right? We have public health, we have medicine, we have vaccinations, we have all these wonderful things that came out of the first industrial revolution. But it didn't just happen smoothly, right? We had, if you want to start with the printing press, we had hundreds of years of upheaval. We had wars, we had all these crises, because transitions are complicated. Transitions are political, they're social, they're all about the contract we have between people. And even though it looks like we're just changing sort of the energy distribution, there's going to be so many interesting questions in terms of the transition. And that's what I wanted to talk about more than anything else. What are the questions and what are the challenges we should be thinking about? So my first question, is that there's this talk of smart contracts, and there's talk of formalizing the contracts we have to the computation, right, to the digital network. Sounds great. So when I was first working in my first job, my very first job involved localizing. It was an IBM thing too. It was localizing. It was my second job actually, but my first big job involved localizing an operating system around the world. IBM is very much like, you know, Enel. It's an international company, and it was also running on a mainframe that was built before I was born. And there was this MIDI machine that I'd never seen, and there was all the sort of computers that we were working on. I had manuals. We had all these manuals. I remember very clearly there was 14 or 15 large manuals for this machine that had been built before I was born. I thought, all right, I am going to read all the manuals. I will figure this out. I just read them all. But there's a lot of things that weren't in the manual, right? There's the manual, and then there's the rest of it. And at the time in Turkey, we didn't even have internet. Turkey got internet a little late. And IBM had this internal network where you could chat with the people. And I would end up going to IBM sort of internal network, and I'd say, I'm doing this, and the manual says this, and what's going on. And that somebody from Japan would pipe up and say, oh, I wrote that script, and this is actually, here's the little bug. And this is what you have to do. There is all this tacit and implicit knowledge in how the system works. The reason I bring this up is that the way things operate right now, a lot of things that appear like faults or crises or failings are sometimes part of the implicit contract. By implicit contract, I mean a social contract. And this is very true for electricity and power too. There are a lot of things like that. And I'll talk about what I think this means. But I'll give an example first that has always struck me as how when we're dealing with humans, we need to not just look at the top level, but also at the underlying dynamic. I had once read in a psychiatry manual this very interesting case of a woman who was brought to the hospital saying that she can't feel her legs, she can't walk. And the doctors examine her and like, there's nothing wrong with you. And they look at everything. There's nothing physically wrong. And they say, okay, ma'am, we're going to fix this. And they inject her with a saline, just salt water solution, nothing, right? It's just a fake injection. They're like, this is going to cure you. You're fine. And she's like, oh, I can walk. Great, right? She goes home. And then the next day, she comes back to the hospital, this time in a catatonic coma. She's in a complete coma. It turns out that she was in a very difficult abusive situation. She was being abused at the house she was in. And the psychological symptom was the underlying crisis kind of showing itself. So by just sort of giving her a fake injection, the doctors hadn't asked, what is the implicit contract here? What is the implicit issue here? And when we think about this in terms of electricity, so I'm originally from Turkey. I've traveled around the world. And this is something I'm sure you guys are familiar with, obviously, is that in a lot of places, the electricity grid is a mix of legal and illegal, formal and informal, regularized and non-regularized electricity distribution. And in a lot of places, this is not just a fault, but it's also this political thing where the government turns the other eye. There's a lot of other things like that, right? There's a lot of places where people build informal housing, and it's not really legal, and it's not really illegal, but it's kind of permitted as a political contract of sorts. And occasionally, such titles get regularized. So the question is, how do you transition, as you may, with the digital grid, from a situation in which there's all this tacit, implicit, political contracts of sorts. They're not legal contracts, but there's certain kinds of expectations. How do you transition from one to the other? Because if you just say, okay, we are now fully digital and we got everything, there are a lot of places in which that would alter the power dynamics between the people who are using this electricity and power generation in other places. So this is one of the things in which this digitization, depends on where you are, is going to come with a lot of political questions. And I've sort of been looking at all the sort of cities and countries that, I think 30 countries already Enel is operating on. And as you grow bigger, who has a right to, what is happening is implicitly that the governments that allow, or local governments that allow, certain amount of sort of irregular electricity, sort of just stealing, taking, it's a form of implicit subsidy. And you can remove that subsidy, but it's a political decision. It's not just sort of a technical decision. How do you deal with that? Now, I want to talk about the local responsiveness and the remote efficiency. And that goes into a question that comes up a lot when you take a system that's kind of not great, but once again has this implicit local rule, and replace it with one that looks more efficient, but is not necessarily sensitive to the conditions there. One story that I like to tell is a World Bank project that a friend of mine documented in a book called Everybody Loves a Drought. This is a project in India. Some bureaucrats, along with India, people participating, they decided that in Andhra Pradesh, they decided they were going to increase the milk production by bringing their cows that were more efficient. Sounds great, right? Cows that produce more milk. So they look around and like they see sort of the cows there, they're kind of scrawny and they're like not producing a lot of milk. And they're like, we're going to bring like Holland Dutch cows here and there's going to be so much more milk, and milk is crucial. It's a very important sort of ingredient for nutrition, especially for children. But they thought, you know, we have a risk here because if we bring the Dutch cows and there's these bulls that are from India, that the stocks will mix. So they found and hunted down every last bull that was the Indian version and slaughtered them. And they said, we'll just put the Dutch ones in and there'll be no more of these scrawny little India guys. And then they bring the Dutch cows in. Now this sounds like a great idea, right? And everybody's sort of doing this out of the goodness of their heart. Like the World Bank people are thinking this, the local government's cooperating. It looks like a great idea. Well, it turns out there's a reason those cows in India are scrawny, because they've adapted to living on very little, right? There's not this like, there's not grains of sort of a lot of corn for them to eat and get fat and, you know, do all the things. Whatever they do in Netherlands is not how they're living in rural India. So the Dutch cows get there, and the Dutch cows are not really built for this. And the Dutch cows can't, forget producing milk, they cannot survive, whereas the Indian cows were able to sort of, they had adapted to eating just whatever was put in front of them, and, you know, the sort of the little bit of grass and house leftovers. Now, this looks like a minor story, but this resulted in a major uptick in child mortality. Because remember, they'd also killed every male bull. All of a sudden, they had wiped the milk production of a province that was previously surplus milk. There are a lot of examples like that in history, where you bring something that appears more efficient, but is not a good fit for local knowledge. So when I think about some of the electricity load distribution, some of the examples that with making things more efficient come from, there's a lot of examples like that from history. There's a case in Malawi recently where they were storing surplus grain from year to year in these really old and aging silos. This is my sort of, not like this is like a modern silo. And at the time, the country had a lot of debt, so the International Monetary Fund was like, sell this, you know, pay some of your debt, and this is inefficient anyway. Well, it turns out that even though it was inefficient and not well stored and there was a lot of sort of loss, it was also their only buffer against the fluctuation in the production, because this is not, you know, super mechanized agriculture. There's no irrigation, it's just a lot of subsistence farming. And the very next year they have a famine. And the famine, I mean, again, you have a lot of local corruption, you have a lot of problems, but there are ways in which even the local corruption is sometimes adapt to the local conditions. So if you come and make it all rational, the question will be, what is the local knowledge that's going to come and say, wait, there are ways in which we do things that aren't like the most efficient way, but these are the buffers it provides. One of the things I remember, I had learned when I was talking with Ryan about this, one of the sort of interesting things I learned was that Italy is all digital. The grid is, it's got all the smart meters. And Italy is, it's not one of the countries I think about in terms of just sort of having the latest technology in these things. But there it is, which is fascinating with the elections there too. I was just thinking about that. And more of my sort of memories of Italy, because it's a bit like Turkey too, is Naples, which is a beautiful city. When I was last there, it had people siphoning off the gas from the cars every day. It was very horrible, right? Like every day you'd go and the gas would be siphoned from the cars, and people would go and, you know, get more gas. It was this just really frustrating thing. And then there was going to be a strike. The gas station attendants were going to go on strike. On that day, the thieves were like, all right, we're not stealing gas because people will get really mad at us. It's like, all right, the thieves have a social contract too. Now, this is not to say that it's great that you have sort of the thievery. That's not the good thing. People are very, very frustrated by their gas being stolen. But the fact that it was locally controlled meant that there was these weird things that you couldn't really think about from afar. If you were just doing something from afar, you wouldn't necessarily know that this is how it was going on. But with the internet right now, things that are not local are not, like everything can be this big general thing and can be improved or optimized from very far. And in some ways, this can be great. This can be great, especially considering how important energy is to sustainability and climate change. There can be a lot of great things. But there's going to be glitches like this that I cannot tell you what they are because this is going to require local knowledge. That will take us all by surprise. And it may not have anybody with any ill intentions along the way. It may look like a great project, and then there'll be some local condition that is hard to predict and not knowing. So let me just move my slides here too. All right. So I want to talk about, that's why the rules are not enough. I'm just going to get to this. I want to sort of finish the rule part by saying that there's a word called work to rule. I don't know if you heard of it. Like if you're in a country where you cannot strike, but you want to sabotage something, what people do is they follow the manual exactly. Because if you just work by the written rules, things don't happen. You know, you work in a company, you know this. There's always something you need to do to make something happen. So there's a way in which the digitization threatens to create a work to rule strike by making everything fit to what we think are the rules, but aren't necessarily all the rules. So the question will be, what are the rules we're not thinking about? So let's talk a bit more about the smart grid. Now, the thing that is interesting here is that you're producing all this data, which allows for, optimizing the load. It allows for doing all those things that, it helps. You can put the renewables in, and you can have your little, solar generator on your roof, and you can sort of plug in and out of the grid. You can kind of see, oh, it's expensive right now. Let me not run the washing machine or air conditioner right now. You can balance your load. You can do lots of things that I imagine will be great. But that means you're also shedding data on yourself. So all of a sudden, you guys are a data company. This is not like the straightforward thing. Data is potent. That's why it's so great. But you will know all of a sudden all these things about these homes. So in my Turkey days, one of the things that happened a lot was like Istanbul is an old city, so you have the residences and the shops very integrated. And Turks eat a lot of bread. And the shopkeeper would know how many loaves of bread everybody usually bought. And if you bought an extra one, they're like, you have some guests. Who are they, right? They'd be just this nosy shopkeeper, and you'd be like, none of your business. And if you didn't want your shopkeeper to know, you would go buy your bread elsewhere. You'd just walk, 2 blocks over and buy the bread and just roll your eyes, because he was in everybody's business. So all of a sudden, potentially, anybody who has the smart meter data is potentially that shopkeeper. You're going to know tons of things about people, some of which are going to be quite sensitive, and you could be like, really? Just sort of, really? Especially with sort of the machine learning things. I'm going to bet that if you sort of have detailed just the consumption level by time of day, like if you have this detailed graph of how much sort of power any house is sort of using by day over time, I bet you can predict if somebody's about to enter a depressive phase or not, like mental health. This may seem like, really? Like depression? There's a lot of things where we predict mental health from very basic patterns, like people's sleep patterns, people's wake-up patterns, how much light they use or not, could very well be used by a machine learning algorithm to predict the onset of depressive symptoms or not. I mean, you're like, we're an energy company, and do we want to know this? Well, I don't know if you want to know this or not, but all of a sudden you have the kind of data that can infer this. There's a lot of privacy implications to knowing if somebody's all of a sudden waking up earlier. Are they waking up in the middle of the night? There's going to be all these questions. The authorities are going to come to you and say, was there somebody in the house? Were the lights turned on? Like if you have sort of time data, you're going to have all these things because it's going to be involved in crime, it's going to be involved in domestic disputes. There's the person by data is going to be interesting. There's also going to be a lot of sort of political implications of the patterns by which people do things. And the amount of power they use is not just the lights, it's also their wealth. Because right now, like as a sociologist, when you do surveys, one of the ways in which you measure people's wealth is the number of appliances they have, right? I mean, the energy consumption and socioeconomic status, quite obviously linked. So you're going to have house-by-house data on this. In a lot of places, the people who are wealthier and the people who are poorer, they might be in the same apartment, and you're just going to be able to tell which house is what, quite likely. You might be able to tell other things about people too. And the question is going to be, are you going to store this data? Who's going to have this access to this data? Some of the data will be very interesting to analyze because you can optimize your grid better. But you're going to learn things that are complicated, and there's going to be questions about what to do with it. So this is my, whenever I think of data, we can just go one more maybe. All right, so whenever I think of data, I think of like the radioactive waste of all the things we do. But it's also the product, right? It's great. Data is amazing. It allows you to do those things, but knowledge does not come without all these complicated questions about everything else we do. So let's move to the next one. All right, so is the grid part of the security apparatus? This is a real question. I mean, we're in Brazil. So I was in Rio for, like we talk about all this intelligence stuff, it's always the presentation, that's the complication. So this is the Rio Operations Center. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. Rio has this, we first learned of this, because I was in Rio in 2014 for a TED Talk, and this was part of the tours they gave. So, like a lot of sort of older cities, Rio is a complicated city. It has a particular topography. It has risk of mudslides. It has these favelas that are in the hills that are sort of irregular buildings. It has a lot of traffic. It has many, many, many things going on at the same time. It has political protests. It has this. It has that. And they have the control center there now, where they have, I think, 34 agencies. It's kind of like herding cats, right? They've got all these agencies, and they kind of got them to have all this data all in one place. And the questions immediately come up. So if there are protests, is all the sort of, because you have all the traffic cameras and all of that, is this part of the security apparatus? I mean, even the decision, in Rio right now, like the police aren't directly integrated into this. But if you have, say, a protest, do you route to make the traffic more efficient itself? It's a political question, because the protest's point is to disrupt it, and you can sort of undisrupt things. And that's a political decision. You do that or not. They faced this decision recently where there were potential mudslides, but potential. Do you send out a warning? When do you send out that warning? You're going to freak people out, but maybe you're going to save lives, right? Where is that sort of decision point in that? And there's a lot of ways in which the grid itself is going to come up as a part of the security apparatus or not, right? How integrated will it be? If there's a political, I mean, this sounds like a sort of a really, like, these things will come up, but as you operate in more and more countries, there's all sorts of ways in which that this will come up by the authorities. And you can find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with this. Do police have access to this data? Is it something that comes as integrated into what's going on there? If there is a crisis, how do you distribute the energy? Like right now in Cape Town, they have a water crisis, right? You might have, like, they got this enormous rationing and things like that. And usually it is hard, like a lot of cities have a political geography, like the places that are prone to floods are where poorer people live, things like that, and places that are prone to mudslides is where poorer people live. But the grid is not always like this, right? If you think about the 19th century version, you got this distribution centers, and you got this distribution point, so you can kind of control things, but not house by house and not as precisely as you want. If you have a smart grid, you can. And there might be demands on it that come from the security apparatus. Now you're thinking, okay, we are going to predict people's mental health. We're going to be part of security apparatus. We're going to be doing all of these things. All that comes with that putting computation at every sort of edge of the network. Like that comes with all these potentials. There's going to be interesting things. Is the grid part of social control? I don't think we haven't faced this yet, but we already have questions like this, especially in China, where the internet digital networks operate very differently and do all sorts of things as part of social control. This is right now there's this very interesting, not a good one, but a very interesting experiment of social control that's going on in the Uyghur province in China. There's a minority population that's a majority in that particular thing. And they're using computational data inference to figure out people's religion. They are a Muslim minority, and the Chinese authorities appear to be using data inference to figure out who's part of this and who's not. And in the, because they're Muslim minority, they have the 5 times a day prayer thing. So they're going to wake up at times that non-Muslims will not necessarily wake up. If you are operating in a place like this, there's this question of will you have this Muslim registry in the U.S.? There's all this brouhaha. Well, whoever controls the electric grid, if it's a smart grid, they're going to have that registry of people who, they're not just going to know who is of Muslim origin or not, they're going to know who may be devout because is praying regularly with the schedule or not. Now, of course, once people learn of this, they can do other things, and there's sort of this cat and mouse thing. But this might not be a question that occurs naturally. Like, wait, we have a Muslim registry of devout people? Well, yes, you do if you have a smart grid. So this is the kind of thing that will come up, and authorities will think about it, and the question will be, what do we do with this data in this particular context? There will also be cases in which the authorities may ask for reduced electricity distribution because of social control purposes. There's been cases of a lot of internet blackouts, digital blackouts, but there might be, for example, cases in which you have like the TV station. There might just cut the electricity to that. They could do that before. You could just go and like manually flip switches. So it's not like this wasn't done before. But it's one thing to do it like that manually. It's another thing for central authorities to go and then like figure things out and use it part of social control. And part of what that brings is the question of security, right? Because if you talked about cybersecurity, I'll come to that in one second. You talked about cybersecurity as being very important. Because I'm just thinking that car, that's an energy producer, right? And it's an energy consumer, and you're plugging in the car and all of that. Well, what if that car is owned by, or if the government's looking for that car, it's suspected of terrorism. All of a sudden, the smart grid knows if that car was plugged in or not. And all of a sudden, right now, there's going to be all these security concerns because what better way to sabotage lots and lots of things than to deal with the electric distribution in pinpoint ways. Now, there's been a lot of interest already in, like, will there be some sort of cyber sabotage in the whole grid or not? That's not what I'm talking about, right? There's a lot of interest in that. But if you have more pinpoint precision, for example, in Manhattan, there is they call them a carrier hotel. There's this building in Hudson where all the internet fiber comes out, right? There's just one building that all the internet comes out, and it's then gets distributed. In fact, like they've just sort of, it's so profitable to be just a millisecond faster, closer in Wall Street, that Wall Street is just buying up like offices right next to the building just to have a little bit of thing. So if you have pinpoint precision, you just take out that building, you potentially sabotage the world trade, the whole, like Wall Street will, if you take out one building. Now, obviously, in the past, you faced things like that before, but if it required physical access, it's one thing. And also, if it was a blunt thing, right, it's one thing. If it was blunt, right, you had to take out a whole city or something like that, and that might be seen as this major thing and causes a war or something. What if it's just economic sabotage like that? What if it's ransomware? Like, we just took down one building and you've paid, you know, this much Bitcoin and you get your building back. I know, and I'm sure, that cybersecurity is a major concern. I work a lot in the field. I work a lot in this field of security and hacking and all of that, especially because part of my work is to work with dissident journalists around the world. And I work with a lot of world's top, like, security engineers. Even the ones that are really, really good at it and work really hard at it don't trust any system to be completely invulnerable. Computer code, if it's networked, is very hard to 100% secure. The question is how valuable the target is. There are a lot of things that are very easy to hack that aren't hacked because they're not really valuable. Like, you have an Android phone, somebody just has to cough in its direction. There's so many ways to hack Android phones but not everybody's going to get hacked, right? Somebody has to target you. iPhones are a little harder. The grid, once it becomes obvious how you can do pinpoint attacks, there's probably going to be a wide range of actors. They don't all have to be state actors. They could just be ransomware actors, for whom this is going to be a super lucrative thing to try, small scale. Because I'm not really thinking like an act of war kind of thing, but just take out that building and give me $1 million and then the building comes back up. So these are going to be issues. So I want to close up by saying that all these things we're talking about, you know, once again, in the long run, just like the Industrial Revolution, there may be all these really significant benefits. You're already hearing, you know, the sustainability, the impact on climate change, lowering energy consumption for the world. Like, these are all super positive things. But you have a transition. And transition from an old kind of social contract, however it worked, to a new one is not a straightforward one. I mean, you could be transitioning to the best thing ever, and it would still not be a simple thing because you have power structures, you have expectations, you have ways of doing things that will just get turned upside down. And I think what we're seeing in the world right now, and everywhere pretty much, is a crisis of sovereignty in which people don't feel like they're in control. There's these technologies, there are these globalization, there are all these things that are coming at them. And you can tell people 50 million times, oh, look, it's great in so many ways. But loss of control is a real issue, right? Loss of sovereignty over things is a real issue. And in the past, like the electrical grid was just this local thing. And if all of a sudden it appears to be this externalized thing that can be controlled and turned on and off and changed, and you know it's become formalized, and the old ways of doing things don't work anymore, it'll just be part of this for people because infrastructure is amazing. Like, if it works, and if it works according to your expectations, you don't notice it. It's like this invisible layer. And the moment it breaks down, it's the biggest crisis. There's no bigger crisis than failure of infrastructure. And I think the transition we have here in putting all these smart things everywhere is also going to be potentially rolled into this crisis of sovereignty, where people don't feel like they understand or control what is happening. And we just saw, like, I was just talking with some people about the Italian elections. Like, this is a country after country. People are looking for a way to feel in charge, I think. Like, if I wanted to sort of say, they feel like, and somebody comes and promises them that, and they get voted in. Somebody comes and promises, I'll take this back from these sort of things you can't control, and they get voted in. The people who get voted in aren't necessarily able to do any of this anyway, but it's an appealing message. So the question is, as we move forward, what are the ways in which this transition can be made to be more responsive, to be more accountable, right? To be ways that make sense for people? Because I think that's kind of what's missing, is that you can't just go and say, this is good, like trade. You can argue with people all you want. Trade is great. You can argue with people all you want. Immigration is great. Like, I'm an immigrant, right? And I think it's been great for a lot of things for me. And I like traveling, and I'm sure, like, every country just producing their own thing isn't great. Trade is great. But it also means that you have these sort of forces beyond your reach that you don't get to make decisions on. And I think that's a big part of it. Or you have all these new people, and what's going on? The transition in the power infrastructure, the grid infrastructure, may seem like, you know, simple thing, although it's not, obviously. I mean, may seem like a simple part of it, but I think it's part of this thing in which we're changing the way things are. And we think a lot about the promises that it holds. But there also has to be, like, what were people's expectations? What were the implicit contracts? What are the local things that we're changing? And how do you do that with responsiveness and accountability so that we don't, you know, it doesn't become one more thing in which people are like, wait, I have this thing, and at some point the electricity is gone because there's power thing. Are the rich people getting the power and I'm not? Like, how do you answer that question? How do you be transparent about what's going on? So these are kind of my questions when I sort of going on, and I know we're going to have a discussion period. And I'm just going to put up my email there if this ever works. There we go. So that's kind of my 40 minutes there. And know we're going to have a lot of discussions, and we're going to have sort of a conversation on how this works.
Absolutely. What we'd love to do now, as we always do with our Enel Focus on Discussions, is open it up to an open debate. Questions for Zeynep, for Livio, and for each other, I guess. A lot of thought-provoking ideas, some slightly terrifying, from Zeynep.
I'm an optimist. Like, I totally raise all these things because I think these things, we can deal with them. We just have to think about them.
Questions?
What did I miss?
The microphone. Isabella has it. Go, Mirko.
Thank you. Very interesting, and this topic. And I was thinking, do we have to invent a new word? I mean, there is the concept of net neutrality.
Yes.
Are we talking about energy neutrality?
So that's a very good question. I thought about that too, because, like, if there's going to be rebalancing the load somehow, like, is there some way in which we promise people that we will do this fairly? Right? If there's a shortage and you can't use your air, or you're getting charged differently, right? All of a sudden, you're getting charged differently depending on peak or not. Is there some way to assure people that whatever you're being charged is fair, and there's no political kind of favoritism there? Because there are so many things for which there are, right? I mean, there are so many things for which, you know, things are subsidized for certain people and not for other people. And of course, even if it's energy neutrality, maybe you do subsidize it for some people, right? Maybe you subsidize it for, you know, poorer people, and there's some differential thing. Or if you're like, really there's a power shortage and you're running your AC all the time, maybe you pay a higher rate. There's already like gradations of it right now in the current grid, but it's very blunt, right? In the current grid, usually, up to this is this rate and up to that this rate. But you can now have this enormous fine-tuning, minute-by-minute fine-tuning. And it may sound great, but to people it's going to be like, wait, my neighbor paid a different price, right? And that is going to be a problem because people are going to be like, how is this done? How is this calculating? And for all you know, it could be this machine learning thing that says if you price it like this, you optimize it best. And you don't even understand. With machine learning, you don't even understand what it's doing. So I would say that maybe something like accountability and transparency in what you're doing, because neutrality assumes that you should always do the same thing, whereas like if there's a crisis, the hospital should get more, right? There should obviously be priorities, but it should be transparent so that people are like, okay, this makes sense. Because just we're seeing with Cape Town, it's a political crisis. Like anything, any part of infrastructure that fails is a political crisis that requires political decisions. So that's...
You have a question? Oh, no, sorry. Who else has got a question? There we are.
I'm just going to... No, he has a mic. Sorry. I'm just going to...
It's not on. Is it on?
Ora? Sì. Thank you, very interesting speech. And I will ask you, you talk about issues, new issues on digitalization in the transition phase. I guess we are in the transition phase. So, are there impacts on local communities too? I mean, differences from territories, nations,
Sure.
I mean, identity, and so the impact of technology on identity. Maybe this is an issue, or one of the issues you talked about, or not.
Right, so you mean like the impact of technology in general on identity, or in the impact of...
I mean, starting from local communities. For example, the impact of Facebook, and, what it generates on the communities, small communities, and then over and over. We see now in Italian elections was possible to send a message and say, you vote, did you vote, your friend vote, so this is an impact.
Yes.
But just an example.
Right. So this is like the broader question is like, obviously, there is an enormous amount, like the gatekeepers that we traditionally have don't function the same way anymore. So, I mean, it's in many ways, it's easier to optimize things because you have all this information, but it's harder to control and rule. Right? You don't have the centralized thing where you had one set of gatekeepers. But you have these new gatekeepers, the Facebooks, Googles of the world. So clearly, there's this enormous impact on everything, the politics and things like that. Now, in terms of the topic here, I remember when in my in one of like my early days in Istanbul, I knew that people had these sort of electrical meters that turned, and people would sometimes stop them from turning with these little contraptions. And it was sometimes permitted, sometimes not by the governments. This is I never figured out like what exactly the things were. So when you have the smart grid, right, that's just not going to be possible because you have this black box and it's not going to work. But that, again, is going to create the sense of like, okay, how does this work? And one of the things that we've seen is that with these new Facebook and technologies, people can crowdsource things. So they're going to crowdsource their bills, right? They're going to, like, there's going to be a journalism project and somebody will say, all right, everybody, upload your bill. And all of a sudden, like, there's going to be everybody, and everybody's going to be like, there'll be a Facebook group and the people will be able to see all sorts of things. And there'll be political questions around that. Because if you're talking about optimization, you're talking of differential pricing. And that's going to, and people, like, it may appear like people won't know, but the technology works both ways. They'll crowdsource it, and they'll be like, all right, what's going on? So this is why it's good to think about, you know, how this could work in practice.
I'll just say two things. One, we've got obviously people following us on live streaming, and they are welcome to submit questions as well on the web, and they will be projected up here on the screens. The second is that I think Livio would like to make a comment.
Now let me comment on your presentation, which was interesting and touching base on some interesting issues, even if you are mixing a little bit up internet network and electricity network, which are two different, completely different concepts. First of all, about transition. I think transition is always difficult. We consider ourselves as an enabling factor. When we talk about smart grids, we have to talk on the other side about smart customers. We have to talk about smart regulation. We have to talk about smart legislation, about a smart context. Education of the customers on their consumption profile, on their sustainable development, how to use energy, is as important, even more important than technology. Technology is the enabling factor. Customers are the people who have the power of deciding and the power of to make the right use of electricity. So the education, I think, in a society with an innovation in technology is very important. We work in a regulated environment, that probably you know. In Europe, we have an unbundling situation everywhere in Europe. In Latin America, we have a similar situation, not exactly the unbundling, but the distributors are not entitled to work outside their arena. That means that the data are of the customers. We are a third independent party operator, and we measure the consumption of a customer, but the data are of the customer. And if you have to make use of this data for identifying the profile, the habits of a customer, it's for sure a company who are selling services or products or something like that, and can use the data only if the customer allows us, with a written confirmation by the customer, to make use of the data to the other companies. So we see ourselves really as an enabling factor, as an independent operator. So we cannot say that because there is a transition, technology has also a certain difficult issue that we have not to improve it. We have to have a smart legislation, a smart regulation, in order to allow the technology evolution and really to have the power of choice in the hands of the customers. I think in this sense, smart grid is an enabling factor. Sorry, but you were a little bit mixing up.
So I want to say that educating the customer, I'm all for it. I'm an educator myself. Like I'm an educator myself.
We are not offering ourselves as educators.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of things like that. But usually the problem is that we try to educate people, and that's a very slow process.
Of course.
Whereas the transition is a very rapid process. And right now, as a regulated, like in your particular case, as a regulated sort of utility in many places, you have these things, and Europe now has these data protection rules. And I'm thinking like the US context, and this doesn't really affect you. At some point, Facebook may want to purchase energy consumption. Like it might not be you, but there might be a case like that because it's going to be part of people's profile. Yes. So my question is more like that broader thing, like what happens
to buy from whom?
Well, in the particular case, like in the U.S., it could be municipalities, it could be different things in the U.S. because it's a less regulated
only giving the customer, allowing it.
Right. So the problem there is that because the education is slow, and also for I work with a lot of people can't really predict what this data can do. So how do we deal with a situation in which when we tell people it's just your power consumption? And that sounds great, just power consumption. But it could predict, say, mental health. And that's hard to imagine, right? That's hard for people, ordinary people. So I've seen a lot of situations and people say yes, they consent, but they don't fully understand what they're consenting. Sometimes the company doesn't know what all the things can be.
Yes.
So my questions are, there's the digitization, there's the smart grids, there's the Enel particular, but there's also these broader questions of we're generating all this data, like not just you, but the whole thing.
Yeah,
So
that's clear.
Yeah.
Good. Daniela, you had a question. That microphone's really not working.
I think that one is. You're being sabotaged by the mics.
Okay, we make it, it's fine? Okay, it's working. Some points have already been touched by Dr. Gallo and by you, Zeynep. Just because I deal with these things quite often, I agree with all the points you raised. Actually, regulators know a lot more than we think about, what's really is happening.
Yes.
And my experience is that energy regulators are very, very tough people. They know what's going on. The experience is not the same with municipalities, local governments, and policymakers. When we have to, educate people, when we deal with our smart projects, we usually include a phase of social innovation activity where we try to educate people to the opportunities they have once they have it.
Yes.
Because people don't understand anything. Energy is like water. You open the tap, you want water. You switch on something, it has to be switched on. But there's a lot more behind it. So my question for you, Zeynep, and also to Dr. Livio Gallo, how can we, from the market point of view, try to make a sort of bottom-up push for the policymakers? Because, Enel has always had a very institutional role, which is very important. Where the policymakers fail to be quick enough, the large operators try to set the way. And it's important. It's very relevant. What can we do for our point of view to enable this kind of transition? Because what I see is a dynamic in which industrial operators are quite quick, regulators, sectoral operators are quite quick, but policymakers don't understand anything about, but digitalization, social transformation, and social innovation. So what's the recipe? If you give me one, I will apply it.
No, please. Zeynep, after you.
I wish I had an easy recipe. Okay, you can keep it. Well, so I think, I am obviously not going to have an answer that is just in my back pocket. I wish I did. But that's why I was kind of sort of trying to raise these broader questions, not just you have a particular configuration. You have your company, you have the countries you operate in. But for people, this is just stuff. Right, their sort of grid is also individualized, right? Then their car is like this, and so people don't really think of these things separately. It's just kind of this broad, big transitions, and what they want more than anything, in my experience, is they want things to either be cheaper or not change a lot. Whereas that's not always the best thing in the long run, right? You want more sustainable stuff. You want renewable. You want to change people's habits. You want to do all sorts of things that are better for the planet. That's a huge, huge challenge. And there might be ways in which, maybe not in your particular case, but there might be ways in which that you find yourself as much as you might want to avoid it, in an educator, saying this is what's going on, because you may not be able to trust the municipality or the policymakers to say, we're going to do this, it's going to be better, but here's what happens. All people see is all of a sudden there's a bill, there's something they didn't expect, and it's different from their neighbor. So you might find yourself in a situation where you're explaining these things rather than trusting the policymakers or it's just a transition. I think we're finding with the technical companies too, you're finding yourself as almost like political social actors, that they're constantly trying to communicate. And part of the global problem is that our policymakers are not good at dealing with this transition, right? That's the problem, is there's this transition, and instead of managing the transition, they're kind of not managing the transition, right? So, and them not managing the transition to me is scary, because there's all this great potential, but you have the sort of the political side of the transition not being handled well. So how do we get through this period with minimal disruption is, I think, a good question.
Thank you. Basically, I agree with you. I think based on our experience, there are different answers. If we talk about Europe, I think you also experience the same. Our regulators in Europe, mainly if we talk about the Italian regulator, they were always very advanced. Advancing before that the European community may be decided to do something. But basically in Europe, even if we think that we don't have an integrated union in Europe, in the energy market there is sure a very important monitoring and development at the level of the European Union, and what is discussed among the states in Europe and discussed with the European Union, with the commissioners and so on, after 2 years will be enacted in every country. So I would say that in Europe we have a better position, a better trend, which up to now, I'm talking about Latin America, where we have some experience. After I would like to leave a word to Carlos Zorzoli, which is the country manager of Brazil, for talking about Brazil. In Latin America, we have some association of energy, of distributors, but we don't have a Latin American union. So there is a completely different situation in every country. The self-consciousness, in my opinion, of the customers is growing. In Latin America, there is a growing consumption, there is a growing middle class, there is a growing community which tries to understand. Education is difficult, but it's important. We don't have to stop to doing it. What we do as distributors is when we talk to our customer through the retail companies or directly about the importance of the electricity, about the connection which we have to do, about the theft, which is an important also phenomenon which we have to take into account for talking about education, which is important in Italy, in Europe, as in Latin America. Everywhere, every time we talk about the universal service which we have to do. Energy is life. If you stole energy, you stole the life of another one. So I think it's a way of socializing the concept of being a part of a community. Mainly here in Brazil, we are developing important project in this respect, so maybe Carlo can give you a better description of this. Carlo.
Well, actually, you made a very good example of countries where you have informal and formal networks, yes. Informal and formal consumption. And well, we have a hands-on experience
I bet.
in here. And actually we did work with technology, not at the very smart, let's say half smart sort of grid, not as advanced as the one we have today, which did create some, did give us some results. Mm-hmm. We did also a lot of sustainable actions working within the community, but also sometimes projects failed. There's a very interesting project we did close to Rio de Janeiro, where basically we subsidized a lower tariff, so we really put some money on the ground, and we made an agreement with the community, together with an NGO, so that we would have a gradual phase up of the tariff to go at the end to the other one. But all the money we were able, part of the money we were able to collect with the legal distribution system, we would reinvest in the community with projects decided by the community. And that project for a few months did deliver good results. Then we had a change in warlord, let's say, or a change in, you know, the head of the organized crime over there. The new boss didn't really like the project. The project actually was free Wi-Fi for the community. So we installed antennas to provide free Wi-Fi, and as the collection went up, the bandwidth went up. So the idea was to create a sort of a win-win situation. He thought that that would be used to control the traffic, which was not, really. It was not. and so the antenna was torn down, and we had a backlash. So actually, on the other hand, technology will help. If we need to win the global challenges, we really need more technology, and energy is crucial, and a smarter infrastructure will enable winning those global challenges. So here, my question is, how to make this happen? Maybe it's too big.
Sorry, could be some words about the Trocadil issue, the paperboard project which you presented yesterday, which involved a social community. Would you like to say something about it?
Other things we do to help communities, of course, maybe they don't deal exactly immediately with collection in that way. So we have another project which is basically we set up points where you can deliver your waste divided by paper, plastics, metals, etc. And you get, if you deliver that paper, that waste, you get some points that you can use to reduce your electricity bill. And by doing that, we help lower income families to be able to pay their bills. And actually, if they collect a lot, and we do again agreements with cooperatives of collectors of garbage, and some families can even zero their energy bills.
The experiment you talked about is fascinating, because even though you set up a win-win situation, it's complicated like that, because you have the local organized crime, and people may both hate the organized crime there, but may also feel like they fear the government, right? It could be like, it's always quite complicated. And in that thing, they were like, they were suspicious of the antenna? Why were they thought it would...
They thought it could be a way to control.
This is interesting. See, this is the thing, is that...
Education,
which
right?
was really
People
not.
don't know. The ignorance is the root of the problem.
But see, the thing is, to educate people, they have to trust you. And right now, around the world, and I'm not talking about a company, around the world, a lot of people don't trust their governments. So when the government then comes and says, this is fine, they don't trust you, right? Like, so you have this institutional failure in which the institutions that we're supposed to trust have lost people's trust. So, like, even when you're telling the truth, like, how can an antenna control you? I think there's this enormous amount of mistrust. And then they go vote for, like, whoever's promising them something, and then it fails again and something like that. So you have this complicated situation. How do we move forward is that you have functioning institutions again. And it's not like the institutions were completely non-functioning, but it's a 20, 30-year process in which we lost the post-World War II consensus sometimes, I think. And in the case of Europe, I'm watching Europe right now. I think there's a generation, people have forgotten why we have the European Union almost, right? Like, the generation that lived through World War II, it's almost like 2.5 generations. So there's this forgetting of what a crucial project it's been, and there's all this mistrust, and there has been the EU bureaucrats. So it's all wrapped up for me in rebuilding trust in the kind of institutions, so that when somebody comes and says this antenna doesn't control you, and your little, mafia boss is just, they want a bigger cut, and that's what's going on probably, that they trust you rather than the local warlord, as you said it. And that's the problem everywhere in the world, is that the distant institutions, people don't trust them. You have to rebuild that. And that's the complicated part.
Veronica had a question.
Did you have something to say?
No. That's good. Okay.
I completely agree with you that there is a big issue about trust. So I think there is also another issue. So when I was younger, I was way more because I thought that
Can you...
Try the other microphone.
Can you hear me now? So when I was younger, I was a way more optimist because I thought that with all the data, information coming from the web, so what the leaders would take a better decision for a better world. And when you say that people don't feel in control anymore, I had the feeling that they are lost in this amount of information and data that are coming to them, and they are not able to manage and to organize.
Understand, yeah.
And so it's quite difficult to me now to understand how all this new data could lead us. So my question to you, which is a little difficult question, I know, is if all this as smart grid, as smart cities, as smart data will take to smart decisions too.
Well, look, the thing here, once again, is that there's a view that you see from your own point of view in which, like, we'll do all this great stuff. And there's a way in which, for people, it's either viewed with, like, this one more complication thing where they don't have control. So I would like to say that I'm genuinely an optimist, right? I talk about all these sort of potential, like, I think about all the things that could maybe go wrong. Not because they have to go wrong, because I'm kind of like, what if, because I think, I talked about the European Union, and I think that's a very good sort of example in that people think Europe as this nice, peaceful place. And if you have any idea of its history before the European Union, it's not this nice, peaceful place, right? I lived in Belgium for a while, and the town I lived, because it's Belgium, right? It gets run over by everyone. They had this plaque that said in 13, 14, the Germans came and massacred everyone. And then in 1940-something, it happened again, right? It just they constantly got run over between France and Germany fighting. And within living memory of people who'd been through, you know, both World War I and World War II, both of which were horrible, we had the European Union, we had NATO, we had borderless travel between Germany and France, and nobody thought, who's Germany going to invade? Right? There's a way in which if you build the right institution and get people's trust, it doesn't take that long time for people like, I mean, Germany and France do not go to war anymore. And this may seem like, yeah, what's the big deal? But if you read any history, it's this crazy thing. They're not going to war anymore, because if you look at every century, there's this big war, and it's just crazy, and it's just killing lots of people. So I think with all the things, all this potential for sustainability, for renewables, all the potential for the, you know, we're talking about the sort of the digitization and the smart grid and all the other things. For all the potentials of this, once again, it comes down to, do you build the institutions that people can trust, so that they're not feeling like, I don't know what's going on. Rather, they're feeling like, okay, this is something that does empower me. That is something that makes sense. And that is fair, and this is how it's being used. It's doable. Like, I think this is just, we have so much of this stuff. It's the management of it and of the transition that I feel is being not done as well. And I think in, like, what you just said about energy is life, it's one of those things that nobody's going to notice until something goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, that's a big thing.
So Jean-Paul has a question, but can I just quickly take a couple of questions from the web? The first is, do smart grids save us money because they make our energy production and distribution system smart? Livio, do you have a good answer, an intelligent answer?
Maybe a normal
that
answer.
Came from
yes.
Neil Cattermole, who's following us online.
I think that really using the innovation technology as smart grid, we can save money. We can save money in building not anymore on estimate, on building on real value of data. So we can build the actual account, the actual consumption by using the retail companies. We can also, using the digitized net or using the smart metering, not anymore sending the people to the house of our customers. In every country, we run 10 million of remote operation using the smart meters, because using the remote control of the smart meter, you can increase the power, decrease the power, terminate the contract, start a new contract. You can also change the contract to another person. You can, in case of bad debt, reducing down the power to 5 watts, only a fridge unit and the lamp, so you can really save the money, don't disturb the customer. And also you enable the customer, if he agrees, using his data to a retail companies, to a company able using domotics for balancing the energy to make more use, better use of his energy. And also at the end, if you use an electric car or something like that, you can also injecting energy into the network, you can earn money. So in a balanced world with a smart regulation, you can save money, making better use of your energy for a sustainable development, also earn money.
I think that's a very comprehensive answer, thank you. Are there any other questions from the web, or should we go to Jean-Paul's question?
I think Jean-Paul and then...
Let's go to Jean-Paul in any case, and then we'll see. ¿Cómo podemos aplicar la tecnología de Smart Grid o red eléctrica inteligente a un consumo más responsable de la energía?
Whoever wants to answer.
Does anybody have a perspective on that, even from our audience? Otherwise, we can get an answer from Livio, I'm sure.
From Zeynep.
Well, I mean, it seems pretty obvious, right? You can be more, if you're more aware of your impact, you can be more responsible. It's pretty clear. I mean, it's a way in which, like, if you know how many steps you've taken, you're kind of like, I've been sitting, it just seems pretty obvious that if you tell people what they are. Right now, when I get my energy bill where I live in the US, I don't get any insights. I just know what the bill is, and that's just kind of it. If it says something like, well, you know what, you're turning on the AC during this time, and like this is 80% of your bill, I would be like, do I really need this? Like, do I want this impact? But I don't have that information. I just have this rough number and whether I exceeded a certain amount or not. So it seems pretty self-evident that
about your consumption profile, you can make a better use of energy, of course. Yeah. And again, education is essential.
And also, like, more granular information, because right now all the information I have is bulk.
Yes.
If I had granular information, that would allow me...
You're also receiving the information at the end of the period. If you're getting the information in real time, which is what a smart grid allows you to do.
That would be more
And I think
empowering.
one of the interesting things about smart technology is that it allows you, so if you are a distribution business and you're linking generation with consumption at the end, smart grids will allow you to deliver exactly the amount of energy required, no more, no less, at exactly the right moment to exactly the right place.
I would also add that if you have quasi real-time information, you can know where your energy is coming from. Because there are times of the day where wind is blowing more and you have less coal generation, so you concentrate your consumption in certain hours. You can reduce CO2 emissions worldwide. So I guess that's another way of making the smart grid enabling a more responsible use of energy.
I mean, you can decide whether you're going to run your dryer. Right now, I have no incentive to be responsible with my particular bill besides keeping it low. Right, that's all I have.
Jean-Paul.
Just to take on the last question and going back to the old matter of macroeconomics and policy and regulation. If you can do that in your house, being more intelligent in the use of energy, can you imagine what policymakers or governments could do in terms of the administration of the energy mix and everything with all that information? And that goes back to our information, or what you said that was quite astonishing about the possibility of sabotage and the possibility of using data in the wrong way, or even to hijack somebody's information and threaten not only a company or a house, but a country. That remits me to three basic groups of issues that I wanted to introduce here. One is, you already talked about sovereignty issues. Countries would they have the right to regulate and to interfere into this world of neutral, free trade of data? Second is derived from the first one, regulation. And that not only regulation of the internet itself, but of copyright issues, which was not mentioned here, but is very much into this debate as well. If you have the right to be the only one to invent something and use it for some time, you have an edge, you have an advantage against the others, and you're not really doing neutral thing. And the third one is security and enforcement. We've talked about as well. Security and enforcement derives from sovereignty, derives from some power of punishment or penalties or something like that, which is in itself contradictory to the fact of being neutral or free, which is the internet's basic establishment. So the question would be, are companies and individuals ready in the world to submit themselves to that kind of sovereignty, regulation, control somehow? Would that be more positive or more negative? And second thing is, just to defend a little bit the policymakers, I think why policymakers are more in retard to whatever is evolving is before they have to analyze all the issues before. They are also compelled to be timid because of the liberalism and all this market-free orientation, etc. So instead of going straight to the intervention answer, we think more about that. But there may be ways to do it. And one other thing that probably puts some time into it, it's politics is done in periods, 4 years terms, 8-year terms, sometimes more. But, and then I would like to introduce as well this question about the pirate parties.
Yeah.
I think everybody was familiar with that. I think that's the first demonstration, even though sometimes it's caricatural, it's not so much taken as a serious thing. But I'm very intrigued by this movement on politics of parties defending free patents and etc., and even direct democracy, which would make in 20, 50 years us possible to elect or unelect somebody at the minute. So that would be an amazing world. Can you imagine that? So that's just to travel a little more on this thing. Thank you.
Do you want to take any of this? There's
No,
just
no.
so many big questions there.
Yeah.
So I just want to sort of to get to the security thing. Like car companies, right? They don't realize that they're in the security business as much yet. I mean, yes, they have some security awareness right now, but all the car companies are using this bus system that connects the entertainment. Like they all have the same one. And it connects the entertainment system to the engine. And the entertainment system has an IP. It's on the internet. I have friends who've hacked into every car. They have hacked into, because it's all the same. Like there's one bus system and they're all manufactured. Like it looks like they're different cars, but the bus system is the same. And somebody thought it was a good idea to put an IP connected to the brakes and engine. So far, like my friends and people who've hacked into every one of them, like they're not trying to sabotage, they're not doing anything. But it's not even that hard, right? So this is the question of like, does the smart grid, does the meter have an IP, right? If the meter has an IP, that's an interesting question in the world in terms of security. Because my experience so far is that almost every system that is somehow connected to the open internet eventually has been hacked. In fact, apparently nuclear weapons are operated on the floppy disk system, and they were going to modernize. That was like, no, do not, like floppy, very good. Like the older the better, because that's like the level of protection from all the things. So that's like, even though you invest a lot in security, I'm sure it's a challenge for everyone. It's a challenge for Googles and Facebooks of the world. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when you talk about all the sovereignty issues, once again, the background is we're operating in a low trust environment. We are operating in an environment in which people don't trust the institution. So that's kind of my background. In terms of the movements, I actually, my first book is Twitter and Tear Gas. It's about social movements. It was published by Yale University, but there's a Creative Commons copy. It's available for free as well. And my argument there is that when you use technology to scale up very fast to a movement, okay, and it looks great because you can have direct democracy and you can sort of like type and you can pull people back and forth and whatever. You can do all of that technologically. But governance, in a movement too, not just like political governance, but also governance in terms of a movement, requires building trust and ways of working together. Like, you know this in a company, you can put 30 smart people in a room, and if they don't have experience of working together, it's a mess, right? It's that working together over time, delegating, trusting, doing. It's the thing that makes social movements manage the transitions. So what you're seeing in Europe and a lot of places is this new party comes, the 5-star party, it gets very big. But they don't know how to govern or manage. They don't even know how to do things with each other. We saw this in Greece, right? You get very big very quickly, but it is more than getting big quickly. And in the past, because you don't have the technology, it took you a long time to get there. And in that journey, you learned about each other, you learned about governance, you learned how to work together, you learned delegation, all these sort of thorny implicit things, the implicit contracts we talk about. That's what social movements and political parties tend to do. So when you have a situation in which you go from 0 to 100 miles in 2 months, you get a boom and bust, like big, and then you're entering your first curve, you're going 100 miles an hour, and you have no steering wheel, right? Smash. So that's the first thing. The second thing is direct democracy sounds great, but if you're recalling people every minute, they don't do something. Like, I mean, imagine, like, it sounds great in practice, but I'm like, how do you have long-term investment in such a situation? Right now, a big problem, like a way in which that, like, say, infrastructure companies can do things rationally, as opposed to, say, the public companies that are on Wall Street, is that Wall Street is every 3 months, every 3 months, every 3 months, every 3 months, and you have to sort of do things every 3 months that don't necessarily make sense. Whereas if you have a 10-year horizon, you can do things in a way that makes sense. The problem with the 10-year horizon is that people have to trust you in that. So that's the kind of thing we have to manage, is that we don't have a situation in which every time you don't do something, the voters take you out, then everybody will be like, we just have ice cream for breakfast, and that'll be the promise, right? Everything will be great, and everybody will make a crazy promise, and then once that doesn't work, the next person making the crazy promise comes in. So that's not a sustainable or good way. Question with the long term is that once you put people in place in long term, you have all sorts of corruption and other things that creep in. So again, a transition from old ways of doing things to new ways of doing things. And I don't want to sound like I'm a pessimist. I really think like this is all doable. You just have to sort of think about all the issues. So
Sonia has a question. We've then, I think, got another one from the web, but let's take Sonia's question.
Okay, well, I think we could be here during hours talking about concerns, about fears, about trust. I just want to share a thought about this and move on to another subject that we've touched very in the near. Let me share with you, I wonder if people want to be educated about all this stuff, because I'm not sure they want to be part of the process.
That's true, yeah.
Let me tell you, I'm an educator, as you saw. This could be a very low path to go, because people just want the, solutions for their daily life, but they don't want to be a part of the process, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. And I wanted to go back to Livio about something they talk, because I'm concerned also about mobility in towns, mobility in cities, and you talk about how 10,000 cars can provide enough energy to an amount of people, and I think that's amazing, and that's very interesting, but we've seen that cars and mobility is going through a transition as well, because they are going through being a product to be a service, like in car sharing, in bike sharing, and all that stuff. And in my sector, communication, television, communications, all of that, we've seen that verticalization of the companies where, for example, our telecommunications carrier are making content, are making films and TV shows and things like that. Facebook has just announced they're making TV shows as well. And Zeynep has pointed that they could go into energy business too, because that would be logical for me. And I was wondering, sharing all these thoughts, hearing all you, thank you everyone for saying this, if it won't be logical that, for example, energy companies could get into a cars company to be in both sides of the business, in the business that are providing energy to these cars and in the business that are giving these cars. Because I totally agree with you when you say it's not logical for most of the people, me, myself, to have a car that we use half hour a day and we use it by myself. So I think in the future I would use more, for sure an electric car, but maybe a car sharing system. So I was wondering about all of this and about what you're thinking like energy companies in all this stuff.
So we think that the digital infrastructure, as I said before, for sure is an enabler of this development for the electric cars. We started up some pilot projects talking about this ancillary service delivery to the networks in some countries in Europe, and there is a certain regulation coming up, and it will be possible really to use the car as an energy provider. It will come up over the time because due to the last crisis, financial crisis, to the last turmoil, the development of electric cars has been a little bit slowed, but it's coming up again. Every year we say the next year, but probably 2019 will be the year of booming for the electric cars. So we think we will build up a good infrastructure for developing it. We are not interested in, as energy company, to go into the car market, not at all. We have established a new division called e-solution, able to deliver, Enel X we called it also, able to deliver services, value-added services to the customers, and they are offering to the customer an infrastructure, a wall in the house, a local infrastructure or public infrastructure for developing it in order to have the opportunity to really manage the electric car. So it's always the question before the egg or the hen, no? If you don't have infrastructure, people are not confident to buy an electric car, and so if you don't have an electric car, we cannot build up infrastructure. But we are, on the one side, providing a solution to the customer, including the infrastructure. On the other side, with the municipality, with the region and so on, we are closing contracts for building up together an infrastructure. We are proposing, for instance, in Italy to build with an investment of 300 million euros, 10,000, if I will remember, of infrastructure, public infrastructure on the road. We have some European projects. Again, European Union is a little bit advanced in this area. We are working in a project called EVA, EVA Plus, when we are installing infrastructure of 100 kilowatt from the north of Europe, from Sweden down to the south of Italy. So there is a sort of move. Anyhow, we are not interested to go into the car business as a service in the future for sure. The solution probably will be, as we see, because we are cooperating with some new consortia, new companies which are offering this car as a service. I think probably will be the future. We are working with some companies mainly in Europe, but also in Santiago, in Chile. There is something going on in Brazil, something going on in Peru. And we see that young people mainly, in the weekend, or people who are using the car only for a trip, on a daily basis, are preferring to use a car as a service solution. So we are working with them for building up the infrastructure and for delivering this service together with the consortia to the company, but not directly involved in the car business. Okay, that's it.
Understand the concept. Zeynep has talked about it, Livio spoke about it in his presentation, of the electricity company, the grid operator, as an enabler. So if you think about it in the context of the car business, there's a great story that I'll tell you. Our head of innovation and sustainability went to the Vatican with the country manager for Italy of, I believe it was Opel, the car manufacturer. And we went to go and present to one of the cardinals there this combination of the Opel car and the Enel charging column, the infrastructure. And unexpectedly, a little door opened, and out walked a gentleman in white. It was the Pope. And he came up to Ernesto and the gentleman from Opel, and he said, tell me about this, what is it? So the guy from Opel told the Pope all about the car and the technology inside the car, and all of the different technical specifications. And then the Pope looked at Ernesto and said, can you tell me about the Enel charging column? And Ernesto said, Holy Father, I'm not going to tell you about all the technical specifications inside the Enel charging column. All I'm going to tell you is, if the Enel charging column is not there, the car is not going anywhere. And it's so true, because our role here, the role of the energy company, the grid operator, is as an enabler. It's to deliver the infrastructure which is going to allow all of these different businesses, not just the car manufacturers, but lots of different industries, to be able to go in to this world of the Internet of Things, the digitized grid, and to be able to use it to deliver greater value to themselves as well as to the retail market, to their customers and to the population. We have one more question from the web, which I'd like to take. You would like to have a question as well? So let's do this question from Alfredo Narvaez, who asks, ¿Cuál es la smart grid más avanzada desarrollada en el mundo? Las leyes, el aparato legal, está actualizado para este avance? Again, Livio Gallo, I think you'll be a good man to answer this question.
Muchísimas gracias para la pregunta, Alfredo. I say the most advanced smart grid which we have today is the Italian one, not because the Italian one is the best network among the others, just related to our history, because we were running as Enel in the past, in the last 20 years, the Italian network. So we have the opportunity and the experience for building up solution over there. We are porting the same solution everywhere in the other countries. We are also developing different solutions in different countries and porting them in Italy. But up to now, the smartest grid we have is in Italy. We have in Italy installed, up and running, 41 million smart meters, which we installed in the year 2000. And after 15 years, we are starting up a rollout for replacing this smart meter with the second generation, which is one of the best solutions, I think, in the smart metering arena which we have in the world, I think. We have in the Italian network 450,000 substations. 35% of them are intelligent substations with distributed intelligence. We have a very, very strong remote automation in Italy, also a remote automation system with 28 system control rooms for monitoring and controlling the network, and very, very strong automatic system. Everything is in cloud. We have machine learning, big data. I think the latest technology has been applied in Italy. Also in the other countries, but the highest level is in Italy.
Can you link it to the law and the policies and the regulations?
As we said before with the Italian colleague, the Italian authority starting the year 2001 was very open to accept new technology, innovation, new models of working, and also up to now, I think also for the future, was in Italy, in Europe, one of the brightest authority, I think, and they allowed us to do that, because without a smart regulation, a smart authority, a smart contest, and at the end, a smart customer, you cannot have a smart grid rolling in an efficient way.
That's a great message to end on. We need to get to lunch, so I think we have time for one final question here, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. Please. No, it's impossible with these microphones.
Okay, thank you. Smart grids, digitalization, digital transformation are not only technology, but cultural transformation, mentality changes. Which changes do you suggest to the mindset of policymakers, business people, and citizens in a few words?
Like, you need the smart legislation, smart grid, smart customer. Like, the thing is, if you do just one and not do all the things that it's going to interact with, that's how you have these, like, wait, what just happened kind of crises. So I think the important thing is to realize that this is a multi-dimensional transition that you cannot do just one dimension. So, and I mean, in some places it has a better regulatory environment, in some places it has bright regulators, in some places not. a lot of things are going to come up, and who knows in 10 years, you know, the way the world political situation is changing. So I think what we need to do is, like, how do we set it up so that the better outcomes are within our reach, right? So how do we set up that interaction so that we can get to those places? And just kind of, I'll just end it there, is that it's not one or the other, never has been.
Great. Zeynep, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a fantastic discussion. It's been really enjoyable. I have two messages that I think I take away from this. There are two key points which have been articulated beautifully by Livio, one, and by Zeynep, the other. Zeynep said something really interesting just now. She said, car companies have not even realized yet that they are getting into the business of security. The depth of this transition that we are going through, which in only one part is captured by the concept of the smart grid, digitalization, and these words that we use. But it's happening to everybody. It's happening very profoundly to us in the energy industry, but it's happening to every industry. And I think what Zeynep said there was fantastic, because it really captured very eloquently how even the automobile industry is going to be disrupted as a result of this grid digitization. And secondly, I think Livio's point, and he's made it twice now, and Zeynep made it again, in order for smart grids to work, we need smart regulation, we need smart policy, we need smart law, and really importantly, we need a smart customer, which raises the question of education, as Zeynep articulated earlier. But that whole ecosystem needs to come together. And so I think it's incumbent upon everybody, every citizen around the world, to focus their mind on what this means for them, and what it means for our present, but most importantly, what it means for our future, and what each of us needs to do in order to enable it and to make it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Can we have, before we hand over to Isabel, I'd just like to have one round of applause, please, for Zeynep and for Livio and for all of us. Thank you very much. And since it's Women's Day, we'll let Isabella finish.
Yeah, no, I'm just very happy just to talk about the next step and the next stop, because we are going to have the Enel Focus On in Rome, and it's going to be the 14th of April for the Formula E. So again, linked we really are committed to the e-mobility, and the Formula E race will stop in Rome 14th of April. So we will talk about e-mobility then. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and at home following us on streaming, and have a good day.
Obrigado.